Hi, hello. So I already mentioned previously that I was going to review this book, albeit in a cryptic and mysterious way, but any other way wouldn't have been appropriate in my opinion. So how I acquired this book is quite interesting. Normally I would just go into a bookstore and grab any book that looks interesting. In this case, I found a video by the author Frederick Knudsen, and that video was the one about H.P. Lovecraft and Junji Ito, which probably has been a stream in the past, which I just missed. Some of you might know that I'm a fan of Lovecraft's work myself, and I was interested in watching yet another video about him. But what actually caught my attention was Junji Ito, because I saw Uzumaki in my not anymore local comic book store, but I just never cared about the books. So I was of course surprised when I saw his name next to Lovecraft. And in the video, Knudsen himself mentioned his book, and I was curious, and after going down the rabbit hole that is his channel, I put it on my Christmas wish list. I got the book, of course, as some of you might have seen on Twitter. Knudsen himself saw that I got the book, and I waited for an occasion to read it. That occasion was pretty easy to find because every day I drive 30 minutes to uni and back, so that's a good amount of time to read a book in. And, I finished this book in about a week. And as you can see, it's not that thick. It's about 200 pages, I think. And I actually wanted to make a review of this book as quickly as possible because my memory is horrible and I didn't take any notes on the stuff I was reading, because you just don't do that in the subway. Like, what the fuck? And my problem is that I remember stuff I liked, and I remember stuff I didn't like at all, but nothing in between. So I had to write down my thoughts as quickly as possible, so if anything in this review might thin out towards the end, that's because of the reason that I didn't take any notes. And I might add that I don't want to call this a review because I feel like this is more of an opinion piece than an actual review. If you'd like to read an actual review of mine, I'll link it down below. It has been the only time I've written a review, and it's very sarcastic and salty, so consider yourself warned. And I know I have an Uncharted review on my channel, but I feel that like this review is also just an opinion piece. I went into this book with skepticism. Just because I liked Frederick Knudsen and his YouTube videos, and the fact that he studied literature and didn't like Lovecraft, that wouldn't guarantee that I would like his book. So, the question is, did I like the book? Yes I did. Was it the best thing ever written? No, absolutely not. But it was his first book and a collection of short stories, and I think he did a great job at that. I went into this book expecting some good old Lovecraftian horror, and to be honest, I was a little bit afraid that I was going to be disappointed. But I wasn't, thank God. Also, I'm well aware that this book isn't Lovecraftian fiction, but instead just weird fiction, in case anyone wants to say that I have no clue what I'm talking about. Like, sorry, but I myself write novels and short stories, and I'm currently working on a weird fiction story myself, so I do know what I'm talking about. So the book consists out of 5 short stories, which are completely separate in setting and characters, but all share the same kind of overarching plot or topics. Oh, by the way, the review will have some spoilers, so consider yourself warned. The stories in the book are in order: We Await You, Bloated, Gideon's Song, Machina Urbis, and The Distended Eye. And I'm going to talk about them in that order because everything else wouldn't make sense, and there probably was a reason the stories were arranged in that order in the first place. And so let's firstly address something that applied to all of the 5 stories. And the thing is the writing style. Like I said, I knew beforehand that Knudsen studied literature and likes Lovecraft, so I already suspected that his writing style might try to copy that. And I was right, I think. I find it to be very noticeable with the first story, but less so with the others. I think it's either I grew accustomed to the style, or it simply just wasn't that pronounced with the other ones. Either way, Knudsen's style is very elaborate and very well articulated, and to be honest, I had to look up some of the words, so consider that if you read the book as a non-native English speaker like me. It's not that I don't like the writing style, absolutely not, but I'm kind of skeptical towards it because I don't know if Knudsen picked the style because of his education or because of the similar style to Lovecraft. I'm sorry that I'm boring you with all my Lovecraft comparisons. You're probably sick of hearing that name already, but it's just, I think it's important to make this comparison, especially in the case of first published works. It's not a bad thing to try and copy the writing style of someone's works you like. It's the same with drawing. You need to copy first because you can use it as your own and make your own style. I can see parts where Knudsen's own voice comes through, and that's a good thing. And I feel the need to quote Yuri from Doki Doki Literature Club at this point. Quote, "It's just that there are specific writing habits that are usually typical of new writers. I think the most noticeable thing I recognize in new writers is that I try to make their style very, very deliberate." Like, I know this is rich coming from me regarding this poorly worded review and the fact that I haven't published myself yet, but I think it's just a true thing in my experience. Also, let's get some other things out of the way first. I will be talking a lot about Lovecraft in this review, but I also want to mention something different, and that's a topic Knudsen has made a video himself about it, and that's Mother Horse Eyes. The similarities became very clear in Machina Urbis, I think, but this is not meant as criticism, it's just something that I noticed pretty early on, earlier than Machina Urbis. This is not a bad thing, honestly, to take inspiration from other works of fiction and try to work them into your own universe that you created yourself. And actually, I think that the whole book could just fit right into Mother Horse Eyes. But the problem is with the genre itself. Like, I think Knudsen himself said in the Lovecraft Junji Ito video that weird fiction only has two rules. Rule number 1, humanity is small. Rule number 2, the universe is big. So I'm not sure if I remember that correctly, that it was about weird fiction or just Lovecraftian fiction, but I think it was true for all kinds of weird fiction. And that's something Knudsen completely failed on. Like, if it became noticeable in, like, the last story, I wouldn't even complain about it, but it just appeared in the first story. And it's something that never let me go since, and it's just that humans, who are supposed to be small and the universe is big, are just regarded as this special kind of being with this special body-soul connection. I won't go into detail because it's kind of hard to explain. That was a thorn in my eye. I was just like, yeah, but humans aren't supposed to be special. Humans are just supposed to be humans. And that's something that stuck with me, and I just didn't really like it at all. Because, it doesn't break the rule of humanity is small, but I just kind of felt alienated by this thing. Yeah. But I also noticed pretty early on that the way the characters are written is just kind of off. They all feel like the same to me. They are clearly different from one another, but I still feel like the same person. Not the same type of person, but just really the same one person. They all talk in the author's voice, which in this case is just the way the stories are written. This wouldn't be a problem if all the stories were written in third person, but I noticed that this is only the case with the protagonists. Like, for example, in Machina Urbis, the shopkeep, I think his name was Henry, he talked in a very natural way somebody would talk, and I liked that, but all the other characters tended to talk in the same kind of way. With nuances, of course, but it just was really noticeable. And let's add one final thing about the characters. I didn't like any of them. I didn't dislike any of them, but it was just I didn't care for any of them. And that's because I had no points of reference where I could identify with them. I already suspected that would happen to at least some of the characters, because that's what usually happens to me. But there's always at least one supporting character to whom I would say, oh, that's totally something I would do or I would say. And that's something that just happened with the shopkeep Henry, and he's not even a supporting character, he's just like a completely unimportant background character. So I think it's really a bad thing when the reader cannot identify with any of the protagonists, because that's what the protagonist is for. I actually wanted to go into detail of that, but why actually? I could say that in my first novel draft in Cyberpunks, that the protagonist Tony is supposed to be your everyday man, but he also has personality, but he's also kind of he's not simple, but he's so unoffensive that most people could identify with him. And if they cannot identify with this kind of, I'm a good guy, I want to do the right thing, I love my friends and family, if they cannot identify with that, they could identify with either Nicole or Miriam, who were also two different kinds of main characters. Like, Nicole was this kind of rebellious student who's really against the system, and Miriam is kind of this shy, anxious, introverted kind of person. So I think I had a lot of variety in my characters, and I talked to a lot of people, and not all of them, but most of them could identify with the three of them. So I think it's just not to lift myself up on a pedestal, but just it's important that the reader can identify with at least one of the main characters. It doesn't have to be the protagonist, it just has to be one of the main characters. And because in the Distended Eye there aren't really a lot of characters, I think the most characters we had were in We Await You in the first story. And I didn't like the protagonist. I liked, and like is a very strong word for the feeling I had towards the characters. I liked the other ones more, like the women who were with him. I liked them all more than the main character. So, but let's continue and go to the stories themselves. So I started talking about We Await You. To be honest, I'm often someone who judges a little bit early, and I had to do it with this one, of course. The first thing that stuck out negatively to me was the first line. The main character woke up. I showed this to a friend of mine and we both rolled our eyes because this is a fucking cliche and you should never do that. But the cliche was not a cliche, and it was a cliche with a twist, and the character woke up at a time where I honestly would go to sleep at. So that was good. I didn't expect that, and very well done. So good so far, but I still had this voice linger in the back of my head that said over and over and over, look for similarities to Lovecraft. I tried to make the voice shut up, but I couldn't. And the first thing the voice screamed, Lovecraft art, was the mention that the characters were somewhere in the Arctic, or at least just up north in the snow. I immediately thought of The Mountains of Madness, which I have read previously. Prior to the book, not previously, prior to the book. Don't get me wrong, that's not a fault of the story, that's a character flaw I have, a personal flaw. I just thought I'd mention that because I thought it would be important to know that. While reading the book, this for a long time was my favorite story, of all of them, but that quickly changed while progressing through the book. I really enjoyed the atmosphere and the tension that was present from the beginning of the story, and I also found the arc of suspense, sorry if this is not the right word, I just was the closest I could find to what I mean, to be very well done. Though I think the foreshadowing was a little bit too obvious, in my opinion, but I also didn't know how to make it better myself. And don't get me wrong, I don't mean, with obvious I don't mean that it was clear from the start that the whales could talk. I just mean that it was obvious that the signal they picked up was speech, and not just some kind of irregularity. But I found the aspect with the whale talking to be very odd, and not the good way of odd. It was explained in the book why the whale could talk, but I found the explanation to be kind of forced and even in-universe not logical at all. I also found the reaction of the protagonist to this whole situation to be very unreasonable, taking into account what happened and who the protagonist is. But okay, I can turn a blind eye on this, I'm not an asshole, I told myself. All in all, We Await You is very well done and was very well written, but the content itself could have been better done. This one hooked me right from the start because it was written differently from what I'm used to. In the story, the protagonist seems to tell the reader the story personally. She seems to be talking directly to you. I found this very weird at the beginning and didn't really like it, but while I was progressing through the story, it started to make sense to me. And if actually the story was delivered in a different way, the overall feeling and atmosphere would have been way different. So it's actually great that Knudsen wrote the story the way it was written. About the story itself, I don't have much to criticize. I found some actions of the protagonist to be a little bit off, especially when she killed her husband for apparently no reason. I know she had a reason, but it came off like, oh, I'm just gonna kill my husband, woo! Like there was no build-up, is what I mean. There's no build-up to the killing. And I had the feeling that the story had a lot of red herrings, especially the family at the wedding, which of course led nowhere. Again, the story has a really nice arc of suspense, and I found the protagonist to be written a lot better than in the first story. And the story was a lot shorter than the first one, I think. But the pacing was very well done, and it was kind of menacingly slow, not too slow, and started to get gradually faster and faster, and then slow down at the end to come to a very interesting ending, which left me wondering what really had happened. So I think I haven't mentioned this before, but if I have, I'm really sorry, but I took this book to me after winter break, and the Monday after winter break ended, our class made a trip to Berlin, and I started reading the book on our way there, but I didn't really get far. And after we returned to Hamburg, all of us got gradually sick, and I think it's really funny that just all of the game design students went missing for that week because all of us were so kind of, I guess, exhausted from the trip. So I caught a cold, which I didn't really found weird because I was whining about around Christmas that I was getting a cold, but I felt really tired and queasy once my cold went away, which also meant that my stomach was a little bit sensitive, and Bloated and Machina Urbis made me feel really sick to my stomach. That honestly sounds pretty bad if I say it like this, but it's a good thing, don't get me wrong, because horror rarely affects me other than make me go, oh, okay. Or even better, horror just leaves me mentally scarred, but if a book leaves me physically puking, almost puking in the subway, this is a good thing. So props to Knudsen to make me almost puke in the subway. To be honest, I won't even talk about the story very much because it kind of left me indifferent. I thought the setting was interesting, something you rarely see, but kinda nothing really interesting happened. The story feels like pure filler to me, to be honest. But the only good thing I can say that this story was very well written. I actually had the feeling this was better written than The Distended Eye or We Await You, but this may just be a weird feeling. I feel kinda bad not talking very much about this, especially because I didn't like it, but there is just not much to talk about. The story was really short and just... I'm sorry. I do appreciate the story, but as filler. So, yeah, no, didn't like this one. My favorite story of all 5. I like it as much about We Await You, but a little bit more, and why is explained in the segment about We Await You. I like the build-up, the kind of descent into madness of the main character who has been ripped out of his relatively normal duty. I found it kind of weird that the setting wasn't very clear, and it made me confused about what was actually happening. At first I thought it was a normal urban setting, then I got confused and thought it was a futuristic one, and then I went back to the normal urban one. And this is because I actually thought of Mother Horse Eyes, and for those of you who don't know Mother Horse Eyes and the story around it, there are different, let's say, time periods the stories take place in, and one of them is like kind of dystopian futuristic, and so I thought Machina Urbis would be going to be the same kind, but it apparently wasn't. So it might have been something unclear in the writing, or simply just my descent into madness while reading and being in the finals week that got me confused. Anyway, the reason I liked the story so much was again the arc of suspense, which I thought to be the best of all of them, because it just kept building and building and building up with a bittersweet but still coherent ending. While writing my notes down, I actually came to the conclusion that this one is my favorite story, because it made the most sense of all 5 stories. Like, everything the reader needs to know is set up earlier in the story or in other stories. There are little to no red herrings, at least nothing I could find. The actions of the characters are mostly reasonable for the situation they're in, and the plot makes sense in the way it develops. Machina Urbis develops further on things established in We Await You, and that's why it works so well. It fits into the continuity of the whole book, while stories like Gideon's Song and The Distended Eye only seem to be connected in themes and not an overall plot. Though I think The Distended Eye might be loosely connected to Bloated, but not to the book itself, if that makes sense. Maybe that's intentional, I don't know. I found this story to be the most disappointing one in the whole book, even more so than Gideon's Song. Let me explain, because this is a kind of weird situation. I disliked Gideon's Song, so my hopes for Machina Urbis were a bit lowered, but I also was hopeful that it was better than Gideon's Song. Then Machina Urbis was so great that my hopes for The Distended Eye were really high, and they actually were even higher because it's the last story and the story the fucking book is named after. Or the other way around, I don't know. And the story started off really great in a similar way to Bloated, where the protagonist directly addresses the reader via some form of blackmail or documentation. And in Bloated it made to make sense to be written in the way it was, as it was a retelling of what happened, with little remarks by the protagonist, which totally makes sense if you're telling a story. Sadly, this was not the case in The Distended Eye, as it started off great, but it turned into a simple first-person narrator story, which I found to be jarring, honestly. Not as jarring as the complete shift at the end of the story, though. As I said in the beginning, I tried to write down my notes for this review as quickly as possible, as I finished the novel, but as of the time the recording was made, it has been a few weeks since I read The Distended Eye. But I really cannot remember what the fuck happened near the end of the story, where it tells a completely different story. I get that this is probably my fault and I simply just missed a paragraph of the story where this shift in story is explained. But that's not supposed to happen because I can remember the other stories so well. The story overall felt like a complete clusterfuck, except for the part at the beginning, and then descent into madness, like not the good kind of descent into madness where you gain insight, but the bad one. I think the arc of suspense was also badly done, while the themes with this kind of shroud of darkness and the madness and the thing with the distended eye and the children were all very interesting, but it all felt rushed and just not coherently written. Like, I get it. I get what the story might be written the way it was, but there is a fine line between being coherently written, but still kind of, I think, how to explain, to be written in a kind of mad, insane way, and to be just a clusterfuck. There's a very thin line between that. So I guess that's about everything I have to say about The Distended Eye. I have probably missed a lot of things, but I hope I included everything I wanted to say. I really don't want this review to end on a negative note, because this tends to have a really nasty aftertaste. So let me close with this. Do I recommend the book? Yes I do. It's really interesting, and while it's not the magnum opus of weird fiction, it's still very well done, especially if you take into account this is a book of short stories and it's a first published work. So if you like weird fiction, you might enjoy this book. But I think I'm gonna, if Knudsen was to publish another book, I would totally buy this. Because I get the first book is always hard, and the critics and the critiques seem to be all really harsh and nasty and bad, but that's just something that happens. So if there are any other stories from you, dear Knudsen, I would totally read them. So you have gained another fan for your writing. So, you're still here? Then I might use the chance to tell you about my game that came out recently. My first game, which was part of my semester project in uni, Nuns and Roses, is out on itch.io right now. It's free to download, and it's a pen and paper role-playing game targeted at new players who have never played such a game before. So, if you have never played an RPG, this might be for you. And if you have, you might still enjoy it for its story and its characters. It features 12 pre-made characters which you can print out and color in as you like if you're into that kind of stuff. Thanks for watching. All my social medias in the description, and I hope I'd see you in my next video. Bye!